Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to another Live at 5. I am your host, curator Kevin Adkisson with the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. And today we have a very special Live at 5 because we are joined by the director of Cranbrook Art Museum, Andrew Blauvelt. And Andrew has generously agreed to take us on a little walking tour of the exhibition here at Cranbrook Art Museum. With Eyes Opened, Cranbrook Academy of Art since 1932. This is a pretty amazing exhibition. We're thrilled to have it. You have a couple of more weeks until Sunday, September 19th to make your way here to Bloomfield Hills and check out the exhibit in person. Today's Live at 5 is really just going to be a preview of the exhibition. It's going to be a chance to see it virtually, but as with all art and design objects, it's better in person. And so I'm going to encourage all of you to come down and see the show. Now, I am standing in front of the Cranbrook map tapestry, which we talked about before on other Live at 5s and lectures, but we see down here Eliel Saarinen, Carl Millis, and George Booth. And Andrew is now going to take it from the usual domain of the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research, which is our built history out on the campus, and we're going to explore the sort of future of the entirety of Cranbrook Academy of Art since 1932. Andrew. Perfect.
Are we live? Okay, great. Well, welcome to Cranbrook Art Museum. Thank you, Kevin, for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be able to take you through the galleries, through the upper galleries. The exhibition is the entire museum, so it's about 14,000 square feet of exhibition space, so it's quite a large space to tell a big story. And it will be up through September 19th, so hopefully if you're in the region or local, you'll be able to come, and if you have seen it before, maybe this will be helpful in some way to tell, as Henry Ford liked to say, every object tells a story, so I have to be the storyteller for some of these objects. So in this, the way that the exhibition is arranged, actually, so it of course features the work of graduates of the Art Academy, as well as former faculty, or what we call artists in residence here at the Academy, the teachers, quote unquote, which is part of the whole pedagogy or the radical pedagogy of the Art Academy. So the impetus for doing the show was actually generated a few years ago when they were starting to celebrate the centenary of the Bauhaus, as well as the exhibition about Black Mountain College, which are probably the three, along with the Academy of Art, the three major important schools of modernism around the world for different reasons. And they're all each very distinct, along with the Academy. The Academy, as the title of the show suggests, began officially in 1932. And it began as an experiment. I have to remind people that today it's known as exclusively an MFA program, our master's degree, so graduate level education in the visual arts and craft, architecture, and design, those areas. And this was in the days before the MFA was really a thing. And so what you would have are people with some degree or experience of art or design or architecture seeking what we would call a postgraduate experience. And the idea of the Academy and the title of the Academy is actually based on George and Ellen Scripps Booth travels to Italy to when they were there visiting the American Academy in Rome. And George Booth, in his paper, The Detroit News, publishes an editorial that asks the question, why is there no American Academy of Art in America, basically? And so the answer, I think, is Cranbrook Academy of Art. He was inspired by the openness and the fluidity and the collaborations that he witnessed at the Academy in Rome, and used that as the model. So the Academy begins with just three departments: architecture, painting, and sculpture. And you have to remember, they're kind of transitioning in their thinking between kind of the traditional Beaux-Arts model and a new modern, more contemporary model of education at the Academy. And so today, the Academy is really no more than 150 students from around the world and down the street, as we like to say. So about 20 countries are usually represented in that number, so quite a number of students from foreign countries in that small cohort of attendees. So I think what we'll do is we'll walk around this gallery. This gallery is called The Architecture of the Interior. It's in our main gallery. It features, of course, a lot of furniture and interior designs, some textiles. We like to mix it all up in these galleries, so it's not a true chronological progression through the galleries, but rather a mix of different time periods and different practitioners whose objects are being juxtaposed in time and space. And so what we traditionally wanted to do is a revisionist project, actually. There is a companion tome for the exhibition, a 624-page catalog that highlights 200 graduates of the Art Academy and former faculty or artists in residence. And so the point of that was to expand the canon of the Academy. Many people know the Academy because of its birthing essentially what we call mid-century modernism now, with figures such as Harry Bertorio, Charles and Ray Eames, and Florence Knoll, etc. And so this...
Push it into your ear more.
Sorry. There we go. Is that better?
I think so.
But we wanted to start with something a little different up front, which is this display behind me, which highlights some different folks from the mid-century period, and so particularly women. So we were focusing on the work of Jerry Kavanaugh, who designed the zinnia table here, and the floral rug. Atop the floral rug
I think it's still loose.
Is it working?
Maybe put both of them in.
Bit better?
Okay, can you hear it? Can you hear Andrew now?
So I should talk about it so you can test it. Yeah. So this display actually features work by Jerry Kavanaugh, a Los Angeles-based designer who studied at the Academy in the 1950s, as well as John Risley, who studied sculpture with his famous wire furniture, which features human figures as well as animals. And then on the wall is a piece by Clyde Burt, who studied ceramics, and he did a different series within the ceramics, including these faces. So we just wanted to lead with a slightly different story, highlighting some of these other figures which are gaining in prominence as more historians begin to research and expand the mid-century period. But right around the corner, is not forgotten, are some classic works by Charles and Ray Eames, who did meet at Cranbrook. Charles was a graduate student in architecture, and Ray Kaiser, before Eames, was actually an abstract painter, but had come to Cranbrook to study weaving. But she spent most of her time in the design department, and that's how she met Charles when he was working with Eero Saarinen on the experiments in bent plywood, which they would continue in their Los Angeles studio. So the leg splint on the wall or the folding screen are very indicative of this. The vintage storage cabinet is interesting parallel to their own home in Pacific Palisades, which we have here in a photograph, historical photograph, which would create, of course, a sensation in modern architecture being assembled really as a kit of parts. So that same modularity that you see in the cabinet design, where you might have an open cubby or a series of sliding doors or a chest of drawers, is kind of mimicked in the house, where you might have a solid painted panel, a series of windows or doors. And we've combined here, we've added in Harry Bertoia, their very good friend, in one of his early screen experiments, and as well as a production piece from Florence Knoll's company, Knoll Furniture, the Diamond Chair series. So this gives you some sense of the beginnings of this story, and there is somewhat of a chronology because we move into the 1960s and really looking at, sort of the height of Cranbrook's involvement in modern architecture, which was really spearheaded by Eero Saarinen and his project at the GM Technical Center in Warren, Michigan, a project that he inherited from his father, Eliel Saarinen, a project that was delayed in part because of the war, but also because of labor strikes. But the campus itself is really a marvel and sets the stage for the modern corporate campus. It has to be one of the largest, if not the largest, commercial project of the post-war period, the immediate period. And there's always a nice story, Cranbrook story. So the bricks that form the end caps, I would say, to this rather Miesian steel and glass series of office buildings on the campus involves the work of Maya Gretel, who is the head of ceramics at Cranbrook, and someone that, of course, Charles had studied with and would know quite well, and her experiments with glazing and color. The color scheme is actually by Alexander Gerard, who was in the city and was assisting with that program, and a friend of Cranbrook as well. But Maya Gretel, in her experiments with color, helps pave the way for this use of color and pigmented glaze on commercial brick production, which is why you see this after its introduction here at the GM Tech Center. The club chair is also a unique item. That's a custom piece by Eero Saarinen for the Tech Center, produced by Knoll for the complex. On the walls, we're telling a story about textiles and in particular, the importance not only of Maya Gretel, but also Marianne Strangel, who was the head of the weaving department at the Academy for many decades. They kind of parallel each other in their time at Cranbrook, and both were sought after teachers and really are just now beginning to get due credit for their and tremendous work in teaching so many students and inspiring them. That we're looking at one of Strangel's commercial textile pieces, and then to the right is her student, Jacqueline R. Larson, who the two of them, of course, form a powerhouse in the world of textile design in America or even around the world. This piece by Larson is called Magnum. Like a lot of Larson's work, it draws upon other cultural references. In this case, I would say Indian textiles, but the innovation here is instead of the traditional mirrors, which might be attached in the Indian textile, we have instead the use of reflective mylar, which would have been a new material. And that kind of experimentation with artificial fibers was part and parcel of Marianne Strangel's approach to using new fibers and new methods of production, really embracing technology. Kind of rounding out our wall is this piece by Gerhard Nodell, who was not only the head of the fiber department at Cranbrook for many decades, building it into its contemporary powerhouse status with many important students, but also becoming director of the Academy. This is really, hopefully Kevin will get close to sort of see the intricacy of this project. And a fun fact, the figure that you see in the piece is Michael Hall, who was head of sculpture at Cranbrook, overlapping with Gerhard and coming to Cranbrook in the early 1970s and staying through the 1990s. So if any of you know Michael, you will recognize his visage. This is also another fun display. We like to call this the future of seating circa 1984 in the work on the right that Kevin's showing you now. This is by Niels Diffrient, who is one of the pioneers of the introduction of ergonomics into design, into furniture design. He had pioneered the project Human Scale while working with Henry Dreyfuss Associates, but had a lifelong obsession with the human body and developing seating in particular seating that would respond to that body. This piece, again, prototype made in 1984 for Sunar Hauserman, is anticipating the intersection of the personal computer with the home environment. But as you can see from the CRT display and keyboard, there's no laptop yet, but it's soon to come. So he's anticipating that. And this is contrasted with this piece on the left by Ken Isaacs, who was head of design, a student in the design department in the 1950s, and was head of design shortly thereafter. This is called the super chair. And Isaacs did many, many different experimental things, but one of the things that he's most known for now is kind of, I call him the grandfather of DIY design or do-it-yourself design. And so he would have a series of drawings and basically blueprints so that you could make your own furniture. So this has been created using one of his blueprints. And of course, the metaphor here, this is 1974, so 10 years earlier. This would have been, there's a shelf option that would turn it into a kind of a bookcase on the sides. And of course, the tablet that you see there is really just a holder for a book. So very much about print culture and the dominance of that. Of course, Cranbrook would not be complete without talking about the influence of the chair. The Academy is probably the leading it has its most impact in furniture in terms of the chair, and it's really probably undisputed in that territory. But all types of chairs and all types of approaches to chair design and different kinds of experiments. Towards the top, we have a couple of examples of the stacking chair, which is a kind of typology within that. David Rowland's 40 and 4 chair, which is a high density stacking chair. Really could stack the most chairs in the least amount of space using this very almost a very thin metal base. And then on the upper right is Don Albinson, who worked with the Eameses and studied sculpture here actually at Cranbrook, but worked with Charles Eames on his furniture designs here. Solved the problem rather, of how to keep chairs in perfect vertical alignment. Otherwise, if they stack, they tend to arc backwards and collapse. But he made that innovation. So we have the typical things that you would expect, the compound convex bent plywood furniture from the Eameses. In the orange next to it is Pipson, Saarinen, and Swanson, probably the unsung person in the Saarinen family of really amazing talents. This is one of her canvas sitting chairs. Jerry Kavanaugh next to it in the green, using also this kind of armature structure, in this case leather instead of canvas. And then I did a particularly evil thing as a curator by putting the chairs up high. We can see underneath them because this is where the rubber meets the road for most designers, right? So if you're into chair design, this is how you tell someone who knows what they're doing. So you can see the underneath of the fiberglass Eames chair. And really with Eames, it's really about the connection. How do you mediate between materials, between fiberglass and metal, for instance, or even wood and wood, right? So this shock absorber there. Right below it is the black metal chair that's newish to our collection. That's Don Knorr. That was a winner of the MoMA furniture competition for efficient, so low-cost furniture. So the seat is actually made of a single sheet of metal. You'll notice that it has a void cut out in the back of it. And that is probably thanks to his work also on the series of chairs by Eero Saarinen, because he was working at his office at the time on Saarinen's executive series for Knoll, which also features that void in the back. But we might contrast that with this white chair, which is the contemporary chair. So we kind of move down the wall. It is kind of a chronology into the present. Nina Cho, who's a recent graduate of the Art Academy, and her curved metal chair here, also from a single sheet of metal, the seat at least, and kind of echoing the history here, as well as a lot of experiments in materiality. In this chair, for example, by J.O., studied sculpture in Korea, but came to study in the 3D design department, which is essentially where you would find a lot of furniture here. She collected various discarded plastic objects from around the campus. So you can see like a toy mailbox, for instance, a plastic chair, which forms the chair here, some goggles, some toys, hobby horse, etc. But it has been wrapped in hand wound jute. So this is a very laborious process done like rather expertly. This was her thesis project here at the Academy. So it might take 3 or 4 months to do one single piece, but this speaks to the intersections and the influence, the cross influence of something like craft, the craft programs, and then the design programs. Behind us, we have our Brutalist section, quite popular with visitors. In the center is a piece by Paul Evans, who's kind of the king of this Brutalist furniture. This is a studio production piece, a magnificent forged front cabinet. And then next to it, we've juxtaposed a contemporary piece, a light blue piece by Chris Shank, who is a recent graduate of the 3D design program, more recent than Paul Evans at least. And this is a technical process he developed at the Academy called alufoil, short for aluminum foil. So what you're seeing is really an amalgam of different materials. It's been sculpted. He also had a background in sculpture. So the body, if you will, has been sculpted from rigid foam, and then it's been hardened through resin, and then essentially gilded with very thin pieces of metal, in this case aluminum foil, the kind of foil that you might find on a fine chocolate, for instance, and then recoated. The fiber piece is another amazing piece by Urban Chapina, who studied fiber at Cranbrook in the 1970s, early 70s. And this piece is called the Sicilian rug or crevice. And it's really an experiment in the merger between the floor plane and the seating plane. So I think we're going to go into the next gallery, which is our central gallery. And there you will see on the walls, enveloping the entire room, is a wall mural by Cleon Peterson, who is a graduate of the 2D design department, traditionally known as graphic design, but 2D design. In this piece done for us, this was commissioned, obviously, to fit the space exactly. So a lot of his work delves in the dark side. So the dark side of the inner self, so kind of a Jungian shadow self, and then a reflection in the larger darkness within the society and culture at large. We're at large, in this case, with a lot of violence. And so he's drawing stylistically upon kind of ancient Greek pottery, so black line pottery or red or white line pottery, and those tend to be the dominant colors in his own work. And then we have the wonderful curtains, which are a piece that we designed. This is an echo of the way the gallery used to be shown when the building was opened in 1942. We found the curtain track up in the ceiling still, and it would have traditionally had a velvet drape or something with a classical sculpture in front of it. In this case, this is a design by Ruth Adler Schnee, who's another important textile designer from the mid-century period. She studied architecture at Cranbrook, well, actually designed, but wanted to be an architect. Her thesis project was a modern piece of architecture, a modern home with steel and glass, and a lot of glass windows. And so she proposed a design for that, finding no available modern design curtains at the time. But it was just a design, just a sketch. But it was found by, because it won a competition in Chicago, it was printed in a newspaper. And so she got a call from someone wanting to commission or buy these curtains from her, but she didn't have the curtains. So she taught herself how to silk screen and started her business doing printed textile designs. Now, what's strange about this piece, or rather interesting about it, this is the first pattern that she made from 1947 from her honeymoon that she took to New Mexico, and it's called strata. So you can see the horizontal movement of the earth that you might see out in the desert landscape, and even some of the coloration. But this particular fabric design was reinterpreted or reissued by Knoll Textiles in 2012, and Ruth is still alive and quite amazingly still works and still produces. So this is actually a woven textile, so it's been translated from a screen printed fabric into a woven textile. And,
Pieces from the book are in the show.
Well, you're going to see some, so they don't match up perfectly. So that's why I don't really call it an exhibition catalog, because the book seeded the research for the show. And some disciplines are just frankly really hard to represent in a museum like architecture. So you'll find many more architects in the book than you'll find in these galleries, very importantly. And you will find some overlap. So some people are in the book and some people are in the show, or both, and then some people are in one or the other. And there's about I think there's 275 artists in this show, and there's about 200, as I said, artists featured in the book, so already there's more. And you will have a slightly different time period, so we have more recent graduates. So the most recent work, for example, is stuff that was made in 2021. We were supposed to have the show last year in 2020, so we got an extra year, and so people were able to make some things. So this gallery is our North Gallery, and we're calling this space Salon Abstraction. Abstraction and figuration are the two kind of dominant modes or modalities within modern painting, and that was something that was true here at Cranbrook and the Art Academy in particular, which made it actually an interesting place, because the Academy has it's radical, considered radical, because there are no classes. There's no curriculum, therefore, and there are no grades, of course. So because we do not grade art, it either is art or it isn't. There's not really a grade for it. So it takes a very different kind of approach. It encourages experimentation because there's no why failure. It's really about making the next thing and learning from it. But the balance between, say, figuration and the other dominant mode is abstraction. And so this room, although it's essentially about abstraction, we have another gallery downstairs about figuration. But it is an interesting impulse that goes back and forth, and sometimes this coexists within the same department, the same program, which at most other schools you would not have that. You would have one dominating the other, depending on what time period. So in this space, I think some of the highlights would be these series of canvases, highlights to us in terms of our research. So this is a painting by Jose Hoya, who came to Cranbrook to study painting, obviously. In the late 1950s, he came from his native Philippines. He was working in figuration, but adopted abstraction here at Cranbrook and returned with abstraction to the Philippines. Is considered a kind of national living treasure in the country. And so that's an interesting piece that was painted here, actually, in the Detroit area. Next to it is another interesting discovery, artist, Wakyeon Choi. She had come to Cranbrook from her native Korea in the early 1960s, obviously working in abstraction, but she's interesting because she forms a bridge between abstract expressionism and pop art. So you can see the introduction of some text and some other textual elements in some of her paintings. And so this is an artist that is gaining a lot of interest in terms of research and in their importance as we open the canon of something like pop art beyond its American and male-dominated history. The large square painting is actually an interesting story. This is a work by Frank Okada, a Japanese-American painter. He practiced mainly in the Pacific Northwest Midwest, and so in Oregon, from Seattle, I believe, originally. He came to Cranbrook, of course, to study painting, but this is his thesis project, and it was actually shown in this gallery in 1957. So it was nice to be able to return it to the space and kind of provided us the inspiration. Then the student shows often hung works in more or less kind of salon style to be able to include more pieces.
Okada is also the reason Glenn Michaels came to Cranbrook.
Oh, interesting.
Which we focused the Glenn Michaels screen on many a lagathon.
Yes, great. And the other experiments here that we show are really interesting. I think one of the things that's become clear of doing the show and putting it up is the fact of materiality, which isn't surprising at a place like Cranbrook with its deep emphasis on craft. Craft tends to be dominated by ideas of material, whether it's ceramics, fiber, or glass, or wood. And so, like, for example, this canvas by Rosalind Talmadge is actually composed of sequenced fabric and gilding. Whereas Jessica Dickinson's piece here is actually kind of more of a limestone. It's more like a pigmented material on a substrate. And then, of course, experiments with wood surrounding it. Of course, Wally Mitchell, too. Or the shaped canvases of George Ortman. This canvas done in particular as a reference to Cranbrook, which you might see in some of the bottom detailing there, the sarin influence. Behind me is a work by MacArthur Binion, graduate of the painting department in 1973. We actually have two pieces in here by him. This large piece from what's called the DNA series. And when Kevin drills into give you the close-up of that, you'll understand what's going on here. And then first is this graduate student thesis project, a work from the graduate show here, which is the grayish color rectangle that you're seeing there. And if Kevin could climb a ladder and get close to that, you would see that it's actually very much made of the same waxy material, a kind of industrial crayon that he's used to create this canvas and kind of a signature, I would say, technique. But what's particularly interesting in MacArthur's work is this combination of geometric abstraction, but then as you get closer to it, you can see that it actually is composed or has another layer behind it. In this case, the address books or calendars, all these personal, sometimes it uses photographs from like maybe a passport or driver's license. So it's this merger between this kind of universal idea of abstraction, but this highly personal register within the work. So we'll go to the next big gallery, which is our Larson Gallery, which we're calling the Sculpture Court. He's not a guard, but he acts like one for us. This is, of course, Dwayne Hansen, graduate, of course, of the Academy. But he was interesting as a figure because he was interested in figuration and not abstract sculpture, which would have been the dominant theme of the time that he was studying here, but he nevertheless found a place at Cranbrook because, as I said, it's not really about adopting any specific school style, but rather determining one for yourself.
What is he made of?
This, well, ours is made of bronze, and so he is also a bronze figure, polychrome bronze, and if you get close enough, you can see that. The clothes, however, are not bronze. The clothes are real, real outfits, real clothing. This is a high school student made in 1990, so the period dress is always of interest to our visitors. This is a fabulous piece by Marianne Strangel. So even though it's called the Sculpture Court, it really has works not only by sculptors at Cranbrook, but also by a lot of artists coming out of the craft departments and programs at Cranbrook. This kind of monumental in scale. This is called the Forecast Rug, and this really illustrates her use of artificial fibers, new fibers. These were new threads developed by Alcoa, the aluminum company. And this was woven on commission for them to highlight new uses for aluminum in different consumer goods. She was, I think, really horrified at the idea of the garish colors that it came in. So it posed a challenge, but one that she was able to solve with her designerly skills by integrating the neutral palette, the blacks, the grays, and of course through repetition and kind of variation with the black banding to help neutralize some of that, and really kind of masterfully dealing with this complicated problem that designers sometimes face. On this wall, there's an interesting series of fiber artists. Mary Walker Phillips, who is kind of, I would say, the mother of reviving or sustaining hand knitting techniques. And she also wrote books on different techniques, as well as, of course, a practitioner of them. This work is from 1966. And then next to it is Nellie Sethna, who came to Cranbrook from then Bombay, India, to study weaving with Marianne Strangel. She's particularly noteworthy because she returns to India to develop the modern textile program at the National Institute of Design, but also is known for helping preserve some of the indigenous or vernacular weaving techniques of her home country, and also a figure gaining a lot of historical research interest, I would say. Another student of Marianne Strangel's was Olga Diamaral, who's also still alive, and we actually will be hosting her retrospective in these same galleries in the fall around Halloween time. She's really a pioneer in what would be called later fiber art. She had a background in architecture, and her work is being reassessed now because, like a lot of artists typically associated with craft movements, as an influence within Latin American abstraction. And using a lot of painting, actually, techniques, which you can see in this particular piece from the Gesso series, would be very indicative of that. Let's see. So this work is by Sonia Clark, who is a 1995 graduate of the fiber department. Right around 2015, she began these projects that deconstruct Confederate battle flags. This was around the same time as Charlottesville. And the projects vary slightly depending on what kind of flag is being deconstructed. This particular flag is a commercial. It's like a cheap commercial flag. It's nylon material that's been printed upon, and she's removed the weft, which is the pile of threads on the floor. So a very kind of painstaking process. In this case, the piece is actually called Unraveled Persistence. And the persistence, of course, is the image remains the image of the battle flag, but then as a kind of metaphor, to me, a metaphor for the persistence of white supremacy. In other flag projects, some of them are cotton-based material, and so when they're deconstructed, kind of decompose into their constituent threads, colorful threads, red, white, and blue, and kind of disappears in the end because it's woven material. And those are often done, at least before the pandemic, with gallery visitors joining in the process in conversations about race and reconciliation. Should talk about Toshigo, maybe? So it's a rather grand work by Toshigo Takeu, who came to Cranbrook to study with Maya Grotel after reading about her in a magazine. Toshigo was a production potter in Hawaii, which at that point was territory, actually. It's a colonized territory of the US, but comes to Cranbrook, and Maya Grotel's advice to all students was they must find their own voice, they must find their own way. She wasn't a very talkative instructor. So what she said counted when she said them, these words of wisdom. And Toshiko is another artist who's being reconsidered for her impact, of course, traditionally associated with ceramics, but it's really being thought of now as this, as being part of a pantheon of abstract expressionists working, in this case, with glazes, and of course, working 360 degrees, and in this case, a very, very large scale. So it's an exciting moment for this kind of revisiting of these histories. Would we like to go in the back room? Okay. So this gallery is called Object Islands. It's really about a dialogue between crafted objects and some design objects, which are also crafted. In this case, we have 3 islands. We're looking in this particular island. I think some of the interesting dialogue is we've also mixed up the different disciplines here as well. So in the central case, we have a series of pieces of jewelry, what I would call, that illustrate, I think, the range of the work from Cranbrook artists, Mary, who's woven, intricately woven metal thread, actually, into these really amazing choker and bracelet. In the center is a Fred Wall, who was really a pioneer in, I would say, the area of antique jewelry. He had studied, of course, metalsmithing, but had and sculpture. But in the era of pop art, was really inspired by the found objects. So we can thank him for the innovations within found object jewelry, the kind of anti-preciousness, kind of fighting against the traditions of metal, especially metal in jewelry, where the value is associated with the material, like the gold and the silver, for instance. On this table, we have many interesting different experiments. One of the more interesting ones is that Cranbrook does not have a glass program. It's the one craft area that's never been really officially part of the Academy. But as I'd like to say, you can't really have studio glass without Cranbrook because of Harvey Littleton. Inside the case, we have one of his early explosions. So Harvey Littleton was an important figure in the realm of studio glass making because he helps figure out how basically you can do independent studio glass making. So having the tradition of commercial glass production at big commercial companies, especially in the region, like in Toledo, for example, upper northern Ohio, and places like Corning in New York, but really how do you do that as an artist? So we actually have 2 pieces by him, this early explosion, which is really quite magnificent, I think, and then a polished piece later where the technique comes to the fore. I think another interesting piece and another person getting a lot of interesting attention now in scholarly areas and historians is Lillian Elliott. We have this example of basketry. So in this tradition, I would call this radical basket weaving, really taking more of a collage approach and creating this, what I think is really a fantastic object. She was working in the Bay Area and was friends with Ed Rosbeck, who, and so you can also tell within his idea of vessel making using alternative materials. Of course, a commentary, the image of the vessel, another vessel juxtaposed on top of the existing vessel. It's good. And then, so we're gonna, the blue, people often ask about the blue piece, that's Roland Ricketts. He's based in Indiana, he teaches at Indiana University. He came to Cranbrook with a background in indigo production from Japan. He kind of does it all, I would say. So it's grows the plants, the indigo plants, dyes the fabric, weaves and creates these artistic installations. So we have a wonderfully skylit gallery here. And so it really takes advantage of the layering and the shadow effect through multiple layering, which is then echoed in the white piece behind you, which is Ann Wilson. And this is a 1977 piece called Space Grid. And Ann Wilson's another pioneer in the world of fiber and art general. But this particular one is nested coated wire in this incredible depth. So, oh, the Grotel, of course. Well, here's Maya's work. A fabulous vase that she created. The linear work is very reminiscent, I believe, of the museum's patented massive bronze doors that lead into both the art library and the art museum. As I said, Maya was a very sought after teacher, and Maya and Marianne Strangel both rejected their kind of Beaux-Arts education, and really, as well as Elio Saarinen and his, they kind of formed this triumvirate of like radical approaches to thinking. This is kind of an unassuming piece, but an important one historically. This is by Carol Harris Sims, who's an African-American graduate of the Academy, kind of unique because he did his undergrad and his graduate work at the Academy. But he was up for a new job at Texas State University, but he needed some more credits in ceramics because I guess they wanted him to teach that. So at Cranbrook, he enrolled in a course to complete those credits to have that on his resume. And he ended up getting the job at Texas State. And then along with John Biggers, they formed a kind of powerhouse art program at this historically Black college in Texas. And kind of the rest is kind of history, but it's kind of a beautiful, simple vessel though. It tells a really interesting story.
Well, thank you so much for guiding us through the exhibit. That was wonderful. It was our first ever Live at 5 with a guest guide, and I think it was really amazing and well worth it. But I'll just remind all of the viewers that Andrew's only spoken about a small selection of this really landmark show that he and his team put together, and there's also the book. So, Andrew, tell us again.
How long? Well, we have until September 19th, which should be a Sunday, if I got that date right. So could that be next Sunday? Oh my gosh, it's come up quickly.
2 weeks.
2 weeks, oh good. You have a couple weeks to see it. It is a landmark exhibition. It did take a lot of effort to bring all of this together. It does occupy the entire museum, so we're seeing about half of the show. So there's a whole nother half. And then the exhibition catalog is another huge production, and that is available exclusively from our website. So it's not available on Amazon, unfortunately. So you have to go there to buy it. But it goes for a good cause, as we say. So hopefully you'll check those both out. And we hope that you can come visit Cranbrook, if not for the show, then certainly for the incredible architecture and the sense of place that I'm sure Kevin has talked to you about many times.
Excellent. Well, everyone is saying thank you in the comments. So thank you very much, Andrew, Director of Cranbrook Art Museum. I'm Kevin Atkinson, Curator with the Center for Collections and Research. It was great to be back here, coming to you live at 5 from the Art Museum. Make sure that you get here to Bloomfield Hills before September 19th. Make sure you order the book. It has essays from Andrew, from the Center Director, Greg Whitcock, from me, as well as many of our archivists, as well as art museum curators, past and present. So it really was a huge community-wide effort to put together the book, and this is a national show here. So Andrew didn't mention, these are not pieces from the Cranbrook Art Museum permanent collection. So a lot of these pieces are going to go back to museums all around the world and back into storage or display, but this has been assembled through a lot of work by Andrew and his team. And so if you can get here to see these pieces in person before they go back across the country, I know it will be worth your time. And the museum is open Wednesday to Sunday. It's free on Thursday. It's open noon to 5, and then Thursday until 8 p.m. So go ahead and book your ticket online so we know you're coming, and come and check out this landmark exhibit with eyes opened. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Kevin.
And we'll be back next Wednesday for another Live at 5.
Thanks, Archives.